Welcome to Monday Next. We are two siblings with two very different businesses, but we only have honest conversations.
I'm Scott Monday, founder of Kitchen and Bath Crate, where we've turned construction chaos into systematic excellence with guaranteed timelines and results that break every industry rule.
And I'm Meredith Monday Schwartz, CEO of Here Comes the Guide, a wedding venue platform built on relationships instead of commissions, run by an all-women team that proves heart-forward business practices actually work.
We're siblings who've spent 15 years challenging each other's business philosophies, and we finally decided to hit record. Every week, we prove there's no right way to build a great business, just audacious choices that actually work.
No guests, no fluff, just the conversations that we would be having anyway. And now you get to listen in. So whether you're team heart forward or team systems first, we are here to show you that business doesn't have to be boring, generic, or divorced from real life.
This is Monday Next. All right, Mayor, really excited to record today because last week, episode 8, we talked about this idea of a lifestyle business, right? Which kind of naturally leads to this conversation that you and I have been looking forward to for a few weeks now.
Right. This conversation about work-life balance. And there's a lot to be said on this topic. I've been thinking about it all week, thinking about the definitions, thinking about the different takes on it, thinking about the fact that you think it doesn't exist, and I think that it absolutely does. So yeah, I think we should chop it up.
This is definitely in the category of ways that we can design our businesses that we own and operate to meet our lifestyle. And so for some of us, that might look like this thing, balance, which I hear people talk about that sounds so foreign. And for others, it may be an intentional imbalance. But we'll dive into that this week. Before we do that, Meredith, share with me your Monday moment of the week. What do you got?
All right, Scott, I was thinking this week about work-life balance, as I said, and I was thinking about what does it actually look like in my life? And I realized that one of the best things that I've put into my daily cadence is something that reminds me, you know how like in Mad Men days, or not even just Mad Men, I think on Bewitched even, that's way before your time, the guys used to come home and the first thing that they did when they came home from work was they poured themselves a drink. That was very, very common. I don't drink. And so when I get off work, oftentimes my brain feels a very specific way. My brain feels overworked. It feels clenched up is the best way to describe it. I think that's the time you go grab a drink, right? Like I need to relax and unwind it. There's nothing wrong with that. That's not the issue for me. It's more like, what can I do to build into my cadence? I started watercolor painting. I've told you this, right? So this is part of my cadence. Now, when I get off work and my brain has that very specific clench feeling, there are very few things that can help. Even taking a shower doesn't really help. I need to turn off my brain in a very specific way to get my brain to unclench. There's a lot of ways that you can do that. But for me, I have found that taking just 10 minutes of doing some really mindless, I just call it putting paint on paper. Sometimes I'm working on like a really specific piece, and sometimes I'm just putting paint on paper, literally circles of color. And 10 minutes of paint on paper is enough to unclench my brain. It just flips the thinking, and it's really, really, really been helpful to me. And my Monday moment of the week was, I continue to try to convince you, my brother, to have some sort of non-work related hobby that involves your hands, not in a sport way. Don't say pickleball. I'm actually talking about a creative outlet for you. Every knowledge worker who works like we do, we don't work with our bodies, we work with our brains. How do you unclench your brain? I just feel like everyone needs to have something that they can use to unclench at the end of the day.
That's interesting. Yeah, I don't have that, as you pointed out. I honestly feel a slightly different need personally. I have a need at the beginning of the day to expend this excess energy that makes me obnoxious to be around.
Interesting. My husband is the exact same way. What does that feel like in your body?
So I really need to work out. I used to run more, but I stopped running. It was just too hard on my joints. But work out, long walk with the dog, like a vigorous walk. Just something that takes the top off that energy tank and calms me down a little bit. And then I'm much more pleasant to be around. And it's funny, at the end of my workday, I do often get to drive home at least 3 days a week, if not more. And I have a certain playlist I'll put on that just settles me down. And then when I get home, I usually jump in a shower. And to me, that is also a way I decompress and process. But yeah, I definitely have a need at the top of the day. Otherwise, it's interesting. I was in a group and we were talking about a lot of times entrepreneurs use some type of substance to take that edge off because, once again, we're sort of born with this frenetic energy. And sometimes we're better to be around when something takes the top off that. Now, hopefully it's not overindulging in substances, right?
Right.
But that is something some people turn to.
Right. Knowing where your excess energy is. My CEO coach has always described me when I'm between projects or I'm not properly challenged as being a live wire that's unplugged. And those are dangerous, right? Flopping around with excess electricity. And so he's like, you need to be properly plugged in. So finding a way to deal with the different things that our brain needs from us, I think is really, really important. What's your Monday moment of the week?
Yeah, so one of my goals for this quarter is working with our leadership team to do a restructure. We currently run Kitchen and Bath Crate and TBS, I'd say 80% siloed. And we've realized in the last 6 months, specifically due to the growth of TBS, that we need to sort of bring those together under a single leadership team. And the reason it was my Monday moment of the week is a couple things. Number one, I've really appreciated working with Jake and Carrie specifically through this process, and it just affirms that they're fellow leadership team members that I really enjoy collaborating with. But also, it's given me a view of the next 6 to 9 months that I think involves moving some people in our organization to a better seat on the bus, but also allowing me to get out of a few seats that I've been in for 3.5 years with TBS that are continuing to have me working out of my zone of genius, the things I can do, but I probably shouldn't be doing. Finally, having a structure established in the next 9 months that moves me into a better spot that I formerly was in is really exciting to me.
That is really exciting. It feels so good when we can come up with a structure that works with the current state of our business and also means that some people get to move into those bigger, juicier seats. That feels really, really good.
So yeah, Meredith, it is tool time and you are up this week. By the way, just a shout out to you for a previous tool. I've been using WhisperFlow from a few episodes ago. I think the hotkeys on my keyboard are wore down because I'm using this thing all the time. So anyway, these are actionable tools that you and I use in our businesses. But what do you have for us today?
Okay, I have a great tool today, but as we were getting ready to record, I wanted to pick up one more piece of information about it. And I realized that it's a Mac only tool, which I still want to bring because there are a lot of us who are on Macs, but my hope is that there might be a similar one. This is a tool called Alfred, and Alfred has 5 different things that it does. I only use one particular piece of his functionality, although I have other staffers who use all the pieces. Alfred helps you manage your clipboard history. You might do this completely differently on PCs. I don't know. You know, when you copy something and then you go and paste it wherever you need it to be, right? Alfred remembers the last 20 things that you've copied, and it makes so many things in my workflow so much easier to be able to just like copy, and then go to this other thing and paste all the different places where I need to do it. Like, it seems really simple. And when my director of product was like, oh, this is absolutely a game changer, I was like, we'll see. I use Alfred as much or more than I use WhisperFlow, believe it or not. So if being able to grab a bunch of your previous things that you've put on your clipboard would be useful to you, whether it's just a couple of words or pages and pages of text, and you're on a Mac, check out Alfred. I am positive that there's a similar thing for PCs, but I haven't had time to go check it out.
Yeah, I'll look into that. I've actually been thinking about moving to a Mac platform with my laptop. And this probably is a bad reason to do it because I know it's in development for PC, but I've talked a little bit offline about Claude Cowork.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know what is tempting you. Claude Cowork is friggin' genius. And I just trained a member of my staff for a really big project, and we already are like, oh, well, there's 8 hours back.
Yeah, it's wild. And I'm only agreeing with you from what I've heard. I am not agreeing with you because I've used it. For that reason, I may be going at least on one computer to Team Mac in the weeks ahead. So we'll see. Maybe Alfred is in my future. Maybe I'll be one of those obnoxious guys with a few different computers just because. Anyway, okay.
It can be really useful to have multiple platforms to test things on.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So, Mare, let's get to it because when we were looking at our 10 episode lineup out the gate, this was one I looked at and my eyes got wide because I think this is a juicy, juicy topic. So, the topic, as you mentioned at the top, is this idea of work-life balance. And I found a pattern, Meredith, of these discussions you and I have had that a lot of our differing opinion is a little bit less about the actuality of the topic and more about the labeling or the words used or the perception of it. I thought it might be helpful to begin with you and I riffing a little bit about this work-life balance concept and what do we think our culture thinks it is, and then what do you and I individually as owners and operators think it is. And so Meredith, let me just throw this out to you as we dive into this. When you hear the term work-life balance, what do you think it means to our culture, maybe specifically those that don't own and operate businesses? And then what does it mean for you as an individual?
There's no question that when we begin this conversation, we have to begin it with a lot of disclaimers having to do with recognizing the privilege that goes into being able to talk about work-life balance. Because whether we run our company or not, we have some choice about how we're going to spend our time. And you and I both know that there are a lot of people in this world, in our country, who don't have an option as to how many hours a day that they're going to work. They have to work many more hours than they want just to survive. So there's a lot of this privilege baked into the conversation. And yet we're going to have this conversation because this is something that a lot of people deal with. And work-life balance to me means, can I have a career that is really meaningful to me, where I can be the best, most high-powered version of myself in my career? And also, can I be living into the role of wife and mother that are roles that are really important to me as an individual? I had my daughter when I was 21 years old. Literally every day of my adult life, I have been a parent for all intents and purposes. Right from the moment I was in college when I was pregnant with her. So when I considered my career, I needed to be making sure that I could balance these two roles. So work-life balance to me, that's where I go. Do I have the ability to live into each of these roles that are really important to me? If I do, I feel like my life is balanced in the way that I need it to be. But for you, Scott, what does it look like or feel like for you?
Yeah, so let me back up just a little bit because I have made the statement that I don't really believe in this idea of work-life balance. And the reason I say that is because I think there are times along the way of building a business where it's just not possible. And I speak from experience on that. I think there's a little bit of a notion out there, specifically with a newer generation, that you can build something, specifically a business, and it may not cost you much, or there may not be much of a sacrifice. And I've never really seen evidence of that. And you and I are talking about work-life balance with both of us being 20 plus years into our careers. My asterisk when it comes to there's no such thing as work-life balance is because I think at some of these phases along the way, it's just not possible. I really just don't think it's possible. Now, people from the outside may look at you and say it's balanced, but what they probably don't see is you working from 3 to 6 a.m. so you can be available for the kids when they wake up, right? Those times when it's almost like covert ops because you got to get this thing off the ground. And so what I mean when I say work-life balance doesn't exist is I mean it is highly unlikely it exists if you are bootstrapping and starting something from scratch. It's in those windows of times that people fool themselves into thinking they'll be able to burst through the atmosphere without putting in that effort, and I just don't think it's true. I wanted to mention that because I felt like there was a caveat to my declaration on it.
Right. I guess this circles back to the question that I asked, which is when you say work-life balance, what do you think that actually looks like?
I think it means the ability to spend your time on things you want to spend your time on more often than not. And I say that because, for example, I've always been home for dinner with my family, including when starting a new business. I've been able to coach my kids' youth sports over the years. I find that to be evidence of having work-life balance, the ability to choose to do those things. Now, every time I've chosen to do those things, there's been an offsetting sacrifice. And there's no doubt in my mind that if I would have spent less time at home eating dinner, or less time coaching my kids, or less time doing these things with my family, that some of the businesses would be further along. I have no doubt about that. There's been sacrifices along the way. But really in the midst of it, kind of go back to this question, what's it all about? Like, is it all about just moving the ball forward? No. In fact, it's not about that at all. The ability to prioritize your time the way you want to prioritize it, to me, is the definition of work-life balance.
Right. And I'm really glad that you brought up this issue of choice, because this is the piece that makes me double down on the issue of no, work-life balance absolutely is possible, but to your point, not without sacrifice. A lot of late hours, a lot of getting the kids to bed at whatever times they went to bed. And then I'm not putting on the 7th season of West Wing. I'm going back to work on my side hustle or on the business or whatever it is that you're trying to grow. But I think back to this issue of choices, how to spend your time that way, but then choices having to do with what are you okay with moving slower, as you just said, in order to have that work-life balance. So when I was just out of college, had just had Devin, my daughter, and had gotten my first out-of-college job. I worked as a corporate paralegal at a huge top 10 law firm in San Francisco. Huge firm, 1,000 attorneys just in our Embarcadero building. And I loved that job. I really enjoyed it. And I excelled at that job. And also, I was having to leave at 6 o'clock in the morning, taking my infant to daycare at 6:30 in the morning, going and getting on BART, working faster and harder and without any breaks than my cohort because I had to leave at a certain time, taking BART back, getting Devin, doing all of this. And I was really at capacity, but I wanted to be successful at this job and I really enjoyed it. But I also wanted to be successful as a mom. So at some point I had an inflection point about 2 years into that job where I had the option to go to Hopscotch Press, to go to Here Comes the Guide. And it wasn't at all about money because the job that I was being offered was actually going to be a little bit less money, which is going to put even more cramp into our financial style. My first husband and I were working on a real lean lifestyle at that point. At that point, we did not have a lot of extra money. But when I told the law firm that I was going to go to this other job, they were like, well, actually, we'll double your salary if you stay. And at that point, they were offering me $60,000 a year, which at that point was a huge amount of money for me. I can't even tell you how much money that was for me at the time. And they said, but caveat, if you decide to do that, we're going to need for you to hire a night nanny.
Oh, geez.
Because if you make that choice, we can't guarantee you being able to leave at 5 like you're doing right now. But we see your career going in really big places. And I had to make a choice at that point. I had to say, how important is it for me to have the work-life balance that I need in order to feel that I'm the kind of mom that I want to be? And so I chose to go to Here Comes the Guide and make less money at the time, but it gave me a tremendously different lifestyle as far as knowing that I could get off work when I needed to be and being closer and all of that. So that was a choice that I made at a time in my life that was very different for me financially. I wasn't the boss of anything, but I was the boss of my own life and my own choices. So I think along the way, to your point, work-life balance, not always, because I'm very aware of the fact that there are a lot of times in people's journeys that they simply do not have the option. But there are also a lot of times, at least in my life, where there has been a choice that I could make. And you see that even in how I manage the company. There's no question that I have made choices for me, for the people who work for me, that have prioritized work-life balance over the growth of the business happening faster.
Yeah, which is an interesting point because we talked about this in previous episodes, but you and your team have very intentionally designed Here Comes the Guide to play a certain role in your lives and in your industry even. But those were all choices along the way, correct?
Absolutely. You have always been someone that I have looked to and said, okay, he's an entrepreneur. He is the CEO of his own company. He is a man, which presents you with, in large part, different choices than women have in a lot of cases. And yet, as you said, you have always prioritized being a husband and being a father, even when you were in the midst of really high growth periods of time. You've always made those choices. So would you say, as you've built your businesses, you also have built in work-life balance, not just for you, but for your staff?
Yeah, I think it probably started with my first job out of college working for a local commercial construction company. A lot of my initial thoughts on how to manage a business and treat people came from that 8-year period of time. And I was so fortunate that it was a wonderful example of how to do those things. The mantra was always, we work hard, but we also prioritize family and well-being at the top. And so it was a family-owned company. So for example, at the time, my children were very little. So leaving for the preschool Christmas show or working out during lunch hour, even though it would create a longer lunch hour, the expectation was always that you'd get your work done and you'd work hard, but there was freedom to create balance. And so I've taken that with me both personally and then in the organization we've tried to create, to where we try to be very understanding when our people have the inevitable ups and downs. Now, for those that have been with us for a decade or more, they've probably earned more of that, right? I'm not trying to say there's a currency with it, but there is an element of you got to put in your dues to a certain extent. You have to sort of earn the right to do that. But I will say that in those formative years of building the businesses, I wouldn't say I had a lot of balance, even though I was able to spend time with my family when I needed to, because I just had to pay that price during sleep hours or after hours or weekends. Some of my most productive times, even to this day, are Saturdays and Sundays from 4:30 a.m. to 8:30 a.m., which, I mean, how could you hear that and be like, oh yeah, sounds like a balanced guy, right? You wouldn't feel that way, or you wouldn't likely respond that way if you heard me say that. But to me, that's a choice. That's when I really love to work on certain project types. And so I think culture looks at work-life balance as, oh, that's cool. You can walk your kids to school at 9:30 a.m. and you can pick them up at 2:30, and that's work-life balance. Okay, fine. That may be your version of it, but mine, it looks different than that and is about being able to work on things when I want to work on them.
Now, what you see a lot in society, the prototypical office place where they talk about work-life balance, they're dealing with things that, because I've worked at Here Comes the Guide for so long, when my staff come and join Here Comes the Guide and they tell me about what their prior workplaces were like, I'll be like, really? Do people really, really do that? Or common things that you see all the time would be like, my boss will email me something at 10 o'clock at night and expect me to respond to that email. And not having that expectation is a part of me feeling like I have good work-life balance. Or my boss expects me to work until midnight and then be back at 6 o'clock in the morning. It's impossible to have any work-life balance when that's the expectation. So we are not those kinds of bosses, right? You don't text your employee at 10 o'clock at night and say, hey, let's chop up this potential business idea, or can you have this one pager for me by 6 o'clock tomorrow morning? So I feel like a lot of where we hear about this is that apparently, Scott, there are a lot of workplaces that make it really hard to feel like you can ever be off or ever be spending your time in the way that you want as an individual to be spending your time, whether that's working or working on something else or just, I don't know, playing Mario Kart or whatever people play.
Yeah, it is hard to believe that those places exist and that people don't just leave in a mass exodus. That's rough when you hear those types of stories. Meredith, I'm curious. Let's dive into the weeds a little bit of your schedule. Now, obviously, this is your version of balance, right? We're going to preface it with that. But walk us through your typical week, not your ideal week, but what does your actual week look like and how do you achieve that level of balance?
It definitely looks very different now than it did even 5 years ago. Certainly really different than it looked when my kids were much younger. I've worked really hard to make a lot of the choices that I make to have balance. So Monday morning, the first thing that I do is I go see my trainer. My best friend and I, we have a personal trainer who works with the two of us. And so we do heavy lifting on Monday and Wednesday mornings, first thing. And then I come back. Lisa and I usually go grab coffee afterwards. She's my COO, in addition to being my best friend. We also live 3 houses down from each other. So we can take the time after we work out, we go grab a coffee. And then while we're driving to and from, we're talking usually about work stuff. We're talking about the day. We're talking about the leadership meeting that we have coming up. And so we get that time together. We get back to our houses. I immediately jump into my morning reading and writing. I like to do that first thing when I hit my desk. I do 10 minutes of morning pages, meaning I just do a brain dump of whatever's on my mind. I spend about 20 minutes reading whatever business-related book I'm reading. I get into my workday emails, meetings a lot on Mondays and finish up around 4. When my son comes home, when we're not in football season, he comes home around 4. I feed him his first of 2 gigantic dinners. He's 14. He's growing feet a week, it seems to me. And one of the things I really make time to do is I make him food at all the different times that I possibly can. And then usually at that point, spend time with him eating. And then I'll go back to work for a while. Then I'll make dinner for everybody. And then I'll go back to work for a while. And then I'll go to bed. I mean, I have Here Comes the Guide. I also run Currently Reading. And that is taking more and more of my time on purpose. It's something I'm wanting to spend more time on. And so I'm always working on one thing or the other. I also do a lot of reading over the course of the week. I have a book podcast, so I have to read at least 3 books a week to keep up with the format of the show. So that looks like reading a lot on the weekend. So when you are getting up to do what you do at 4:30 a.m., I don't wake up at 4:30 a.m., but I spend hours every morning on Saturday and Sunday reading. It's my preferred time to read. The only time I read, but I get a lot of my reading done during that time. I spend a lot of time with my grandkids, who are super important to me. I try to at least once a week have them overnight, spend time with them. That's something that I really intentionally build in time for because it's a super important role to me. Does that kind of answer your question? I work a lot over the course of the week. I average 40 to 60 hours of work and then the other stuff. But I don't know, I'm just constantly moving forward. I'm constantly doing something. If I'm driving, I'm listening to an audiobook. If I'm doing chores around the house, I'm listening to an audiobook. I think that kind of covers it.
Yeah, which as I hear you describe that, would you agree or disagree with this, that schedule that you outlined, highly unlikely a person in the throes of launching or starting a business could adhere to that, correct?
Certainly, there are a lot of things that when you're in that grind that you do give up. But even over the course of the last few weeks, I've been working a tremendous amount of hours on all the different projects that I'm working on. And I've definitely caught myself having some conversations with my husband going like, yeah, I'm definitely burning the candle at every end and I'm feeling some fray I'm not going to lie about it. I'm feeling some fray. And when I'm in that kind of grind mode, does look like me canceling some things that I normally would go and do, or not getting to read as much. So there's choices that have to be made. The seasonality of my kids, like my youngest being 14, my oldest three are out of the house and doing their own thing. There's no question my cadence looks different from when we had three young kids in the house, because that takes a whole different kind of lift and sacrifice to be a present and active mom. So yes, in some ways I do agree with you. And in other ways, I would say there's a lot of times that I am really, really grinding even now.
I hear you. As you were talking, I was thinking through, do you know more people in a corporate setting that are more employees that struggle with this than business owners and operators that struggle with this?
I think the struggle is different. I think there's equal struggle, but you have different choices that you can make, right? Like people who are running businesses or building their business or in a stressful time with their business, you have to drop everything and do what needs to be done because there's nobody else to do it. It lands on you. Whereas for people who are working in more of a corporate setting, their choices are different because they don't have as much agency in what projects they're working on, or prioritization of things, or expectation. Like they can't set their own expectations. I think every single person is trying to find their best fit. Even stay-at-home moms that I am really good friends with, they are trying to work on work-life balance for themselves. I think this is an every person kind of struggle. At this point for you, do you feel like you're in a very different cadence now that you're not in build mode than you were when you were in build mode, in hustle mode?
Yes, I do feel like I'm in a different spot. I feel like I have a few different phases. So we started TBS in 2023, and that was very much like having a kid at an older age, right? And so I'd say in 22 and 21, 20 was rough. COVID created, the force was disturbed. But in home improvement, pretty quickly, late 2020 and into 21, it actually accelerated. So we weren't like fighting to keep the business open via COVID. It was more fighting to handle the volume and then the friction of the actual illness and how do we navigate all that in people's homes. So 21 and 22 were this little golden era where COVID was passing and TBS had not yet started, and we had the beginnings of our leadership team in place and in great roles, and it was just Crate by itself, kitchen and bath Crate. So for that 21-22 window, I started to experience snippets of this balance that I've been seeking for a decade. And then, Meredith, somewhere along the way, deep in my psychology, may have been a version of quasi self-sabotage. I was like, all right, time to start something new. And I was right back into that grind. That was a decision, 100%. Did I count the costs well, fiscally and time-wise and stress-wise? No, I didn't. Big mistake. Now, I'm not saying if I would have properly counted the costs, I wouldn't have done it again, but I probably would have approached it differently, and I at least would have approached it with a more intelligent perspective. So I did achieve this kind of golden area in 21 and 22, and then 23 right back into it, 24 in it, 25 a little bit better, and then as I mentioned at the top of the show, 26 feeling like I'm coming out and have an opportunity to get back to that golden era by the end of 26. So it's really this weird ebb and flow of freedom and flexibility. But I also wonder if there's something wrong with me that causes me to just start these things.
I think the other thing I notice, of course, is during that time, even for you, your youngest is very similar in age to my youngest. So you also are entering a different season in your parenting journey where the kid element isn't taking as much time or as much lift as it does when they're really, really young. But it is interesting to think about. This is certainly something that my husband really makes sure that I think about periodically, which is, hey, I wonder what your life would have looked like if you hadn't started currently reading in 2018. What would it look like if you just had one job? So I can talk all day about how I've made Here Comes the Guide a really great example of a company that prioritizes work-life balance. And the people who work for Here Comes the Guide, I will go to great lengths to protect their ability to only work a 32-hour work week. We live what we say. We don't have people working more than 8 hours a day, 4 days a week. And yet, for me personally, I really don't know what my life would look like if I just had Here Comes the Guide as my only work, because I only know my life now in terms of having both of these jobs. So that's a really, really interesting question. And I think that the answer is that I would do exactly what you did. I did do it, and I would do it 7 years later, 8 years later, I would do it again. I don't know if I run on a speed that would allow me to just have a company that prioritizes work-life balance and be like, okay, I'm done working. It's 4:00. Then what am I going to, I spend time with my family, obviously, but I do that already. But then, I don't know, watch TV, which there's nothing wrong with watching TV. And I do sometimes, and I love it. But the choices that we make definitely create the cadence of our lives. There are a lot of times where we have great ability to make those choices. And so when I say I have work-life balance, I think it's me saying, to your point, we get to spend the time doing the things that we want to be doing.
Yeah. And I think if we're being honest, well, I don't know if you'd say this, but if I'm being honest, me starting new things has probably prevented some old things from growing more quickly or bigger or more profitable. And there's been an era in my life when I would maybe talk with my business coach, Greg, or talk with others, and I would feel like an element of guilt over this topic of needing to start new things. But I'm kind of done with apologizing for that, quite frankly, because I can either try to fight against it, or I can just embrace it and say, this is just the way I am. Now I have to be very intelligent with how I approach it. I think this podcast that we're doing for me is a good example of that, because I'm not going out and trying to acquire a company. I'm not going out and trying to acquire real estate or something like that, because I know we need to build up our coffers. But this allows me to start something new that doesn't cost much at all. And it scratches that itch without some of the dangerous elements of some other ways I could try to satisfy that desire, that urge. So I think you have to be really careful with this. But I think this is just the entrepreneur's dilemma. And I think that if we get to the root of who this podcast is for, it's for the people that listen to this and go, oh my God, they're talking about me.
Yeah, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one.
Right? Because it doesn't sound like a problem to those that don't have it. Because they're like, oh, that must be nice. You just can't stop starting new businesses. Huh, must be nice.
And yeah, wouldn't it be great to be like, I love work?
It is a legitimate problem because it is something that has to be, I don't want to say controlled, but it has to be...
It definitely has to be managed. You have to look it straight in the face. And this issue of work-life balance, when we talk about it from a personal perspective, and we've talked about it a little bit before, Scott, it is not easy to be married to somebody who is wired the way that we are wired. And you and I both got really, really lucky. I was thinking about that picture of you and Missy at the most recent Christmas party. And I love that picture because you guys both look so great, and I love Missy's dress, and I love Missy. She's the best possible sister-in-law that I could have gotten. She's just a really, really great person. But what I really love is that when I saw it, I was like, we really, really need to remember that without a partner who really understands us in the way that we're wired, we can't do a lot of what we do. And she is a person who really gets you and what drives you and what's important to you and what is within your ability to control and the pieces of you that you can't just turn off like a light switch. And my husband is the same. And also, getting really, really real, there's no question that there have been times in my marriage where I have not managed this part of me as well as I needed to. And I really needed to look in the face the reality that there has to be some balance here if I'm going to want to be in a marriage relationship that's working for both of us. That's a really real situation. We came very, very close to ending our 25-year marriage. And it wasn't just because of that, but there was definitely a piece of it that I needed to really say, how much am I using work to numb out some of the stuff that I need to deal with, like in my relationship? And how much is work just taking priority over my relationship? And so we were very lucky that we were able to put in the work and have resources to figure out a new way of coming to a better balance. But man, that's a tight wire every day.
It is. Yeah. We've matriculated into Monday Family Business here with a perfect little segue. It's tough being married to an entrepreneur. It's tough being married to someone that wants to do this. My wife at 30 years old with a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old was 100% okay with her husband leaving a stable job and starting a construction company in the midst of the 0809 downturn. And she didn't work. She stayed at home. She was 100% let's go for it. I didn't realize it in the midst of it. It was incredible that she was able to support me in that way. And that's just one example. But yeah, you're right. It can take a toll, and it's not for the faint of heart. That's for sure.
It really isn't, because like you said, living in our own brains, we think that this is how everybody is wired, but it just absolutely is not. So it's like when I said to my husband, like, hey, I'm going to start a podcast in addition to being CEO. And he was like, you'd be fantastic at that. You've got to give it a try. You absolutely have to do that. But it's going to take some time and it's going to be lots of late nights. And he was like, then that's what we'll do, because that's going to make you happy. And I know what you need to be happy. And so shout out to all the spouses of entrepreneurs or partners of entrepreneurs, because it's not an easy game.
No, it's not easy at all. If I think back to our home of origin, Meredith, when it came to our parents, I feel like they had jobs that, while they both struggled with certain elements of them, did give them a significant amount of time to be able to spend with family and create balance. Do you recall it being the same way?
I absolutely do. And again, especially in our mom's case, we're talking about choices. And I think she was making a similar set of choices that I was. Like, I want to be a really good mom, and also I want to work and I want to have this career. And so I see now as an adult more than I did at that point, the choices that she was making and the sacrifices that she was making to be able to do both of those things really well. And our dad was always home for dinner and home on the weekends. So they did make choices to have that kind of life, even though there's a part of me that thinks, boy, I'd love to know what they would each say now about, like, if I could go back and do my career again, would I make different choices? That would be an interesting question to ask them.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Well, Meredith, this was an interesting episode. I think at the end of the day, I discovered that we have a little more commonality on our approach to this than I had expected when I first saw the show notes. So I appreciate you sharing a little bit about kind of your journey when it comes to achieving work-life balance. What would you say, Meredith, would be a micro action that our listeners could take around this topic? Perhaps if they hear this and they're a little bit concerned about their approach to this topic, what would you say to them?
You need to take a few minutes to really sit down. I would do the sitting down and writing this out, just because that's helpful for the way my brain thinks. And really thinking about the question, what is your definition of work-life balance? What does it actually look like? Not in big concepts, but in actuality, in execution. What does it look like? And how far away are you from what you as an individual consider work-life balance? What are the things that you want to be able to do in your day, your week, your month? And are you able to do those things? And then you have to think, okay, if I'm not there, how can I begin to make a plan to get myself balanced in a way that feels really good to me? And sometimes that means, how do I work less. And sometimes that means, how do I carve out time to work more on another project that means a lot to me? And that's why it's such an individual introspection.
Yeah, definitely. Much less about work-life balance and much more about making sure you're designing a scenario in which your work serves you as opposed to you serving your work. Whether you own a business, whether you're a C-suite employee, no matter your role, at the end of the day, the tail can't wag the dog, right? That's really important for us to remember. All right, next week, Meredith, we wrap season 1, and I love this idea you came up with where you and I are going to be sharing about some of our worst business mistakes. How long can the episode be is what I'm asking. And then perhaps related to those, 3 pieces of advice that we might offer business leaders as they move forward. So what are your thoughts on next week's topic? Are you loving it?
I'm looking forward to it. I think that hearing people actually get specific about mistakes that they've made in their business, like when things just really flopped or just really did not go as planned, it makes me feel a lot less alone in how often I screw up. So I'm looking forward to it. All right, that is a wrap on another episode of Monday Next. Before we sign off, here's where you can find us between episodes. You can find me at Meredith Monday Schwartz on Instagram. And if you want to hear me talk about books instead of business, you can join me at the Currently Reading podcast.
Yeah, you can connect with me on Instagram and TikTok at Scott Monday, or even better on my Substack at scottmonday.substack.com. There I write about building businesses, changing culture, implementing AI, and applying systems to your family and personal life. And also you can follow the show over on Instagram at Monday Next Podcast.
If you're enjoying our conversations, tell someone you know about the show. Word of mouth is the absolute best way for our podcast to grow.
And you can also help us grow by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts and sharing the show on your socials. That's a great way for us to get new listeners.
And if you have strong feelings about anything that we've said here about work-life balance, is it achievable? Is it a myth? We would love to hear from you. Send us a direct message. We are genuinely curious about where you land on this.
So next week is our season wrap up. We're going to talk a little bit about our mistakes, our advice for leaders, and maybe do a little breakdown of what surprised us over the last 9 episodes. Stay tuned, and you're going to discover along with us if Monday Next is going to continue.
Perfect. Okay, until Monday next, keep being audacious.